Block patterns is one of my favorite new features. A block pattern is a group of blocks that have been combined together to create a layout element. With the release of WordPress 5.5, block patterns are no longer experimental and they are part of WordPress core. If you are using an earlier WordPress version, you need to install and activate the Gutenberg plugin. You do not need to enable the full site editing experiment for block patterns to work. Block patterns are not as advanced as custom blocks, so they are easier to create, but they are also more limited. Patterns can combine core blocks or blocks from plugins, but they do not have any additional controls. There are many use cases for block patterns. Because they can be reused and placed anywhere, and because they can be styled using the Gutenberg controls, a pattern offers more flexibility than, for example, a customizer option. And I believe that to some extent it will replace the customizer. You could create an advanced author profile, a service section from a 3-column block, or define sections for a store using e-commerce blocks and the cover block. By combining block patterns with unique additional CSS classes, variations and custom block styles, you can style and create many different sections with different purposes for your team. WordPress 5.5 comes with a couple of block patterns already installed and ready to use. You can find the patterns in the editor by using the search or in the Block Patterns tab in the Add Block menu. The core patterns are basic. You will find patterns for buttons and patterns designed to help users get started with the columns block. You can place multiple copies of the same pattern in the same post or page. Once a pattern is added in the editor, they are now individual blobs that can be moved, edited, or replaced. In a sense, the pattern stops being a pattern as soon as it is placed in the editor. Another benefit is that because the patterns are only blocks, the content is always saved even if the user switches themes. Having said that, it might look different in different themes. I suggest that you go and test the default core block patterns with your existing themes to make sure that everything looks correct. The pattern and the example code used in this lesson is available for download on the GitHub repository. So, how do you create a new block pattern? The first step is, of course, to have a plan for what you want your block pattern to do. I'm going to take a contact form provided by Ninja Forms. I'm going to add a background image to it and place a heading above it. I have installed the plugin that I need, and the first element that I'm going to add in the editor is a cover block. For the cover block, I have selected an image that is already in my media library that I'm going to set as the background. I want to adjust the colors a little bit, so I'm going to select a gradient on top of the background image. I would also like the block to be a little wider. Now I will add my heading text. And I'm going to make the text a little bit larger and move it to the top of the cover block. Next, I am adding the Linear Forms block, and here I have to select which form I would like to show. Then I will save the block content and preview it on the front. This looks okay, but I still need to make these blocks into a pattern. I am going to copy all of the block code from the code editor mode. And then I'm going to use this as a value inside the PHP function called register block pattern. In my team, I have prepared a new file that I call block patterns, but you can also place this inside your functions.php file if you prefer. Because this is a new feature, I'm going to check if the function exists before I do anything else. I do this with a simple if statement. If function exists, register block pattern, do this. I am also checking for the Linear Forms plugin, since it is used inside the pattern. The first property inside the register block pattern function is a unique name for the pattern. I'm using a prefix, which in my case is my team slug, and the slug for the block name. This is followed by an array of properties. The required items are the title, which is the visible name inside the block editor, and the content where we place the block markup. The function also has 4 optional properties. Each pattern comes with its own preview. The Viewport Width property lets us specify the width of the pattern inside the preview. This is useful if the pattern is extra tall or narrow. The description is a visually hidden text that describes the pattern. It is a complement to the visual preview for users with visual impairment who may use a screen reader to use the editor. So even though it says it's optional, I encourage you to always use it. In time, as more block patterns are added, it might be difficult to differentiate between block patterns that has very similar titles. The final 2 properties helps users find your block pattern inside the editor: keywords and categories. The values for both these properties needs to be formatted as an array. You can add any suitable words that you want as your keywords. Remember to wrap the word inside a translation function. For the categories, you have 2 options. Either use a category provided by WordPress, or register your own. The available categories are buttons, columns, gallery, header, and text. I would like to register 2 categories: forms and example. This is done with the help of the function register block pattern category. It uses 2 properties: the slug, in this case forms, and the visible label. The slug is placed inside the categories property of register block pattern. You can register multiple categories separated by a comma. The pattern will be visible under both categories in the editor. If you choose to not add a category, the pattern will be visible under the label Uncategorized. Now we can move on to the content and the code that we copied from the code editor mode. I prefer to wrap my code inside single quotes. If you want to use double quotes, remember that the double quotes that are inside the HTML code needs to be escaped with \. This simple pattern only has one custom text string, book an appointment, which is our heading, but we still need to make that translation ready. We can add the translation function directly in our string. If we need to use more advanced code or conditional logic, for example to display a message if Ninja Forms is not installed, it would have been better to create a variable and use that variable as a value inside the content. There is still one more thing that we need to update. For the cover block's background image to work, we need to replace localhost with a path in our theme. I have placed the flower image inside my theme's images folder, and the function I have chosen to use to include the image is getThemeFileURI. My next and final tip is optional. If you want to be able to style your pattern, you can add the CSS class to the wrapper element, in this case our cover block. First, we add the class name attribute inside the block comment, where the value is the CSS class. And we need to duplicate this for the wrapping div, so we place the class name inside the class attribute.